Whether you're jumping into Shadow the Erdtree DLC for the very first time, or you're just trying to get every single Scadutree fragment for your gameplay, I'm going to very quickly cover all these different locations for these fragments so you can quickly level up in the DLC. So let's get into it. Now to quickly give a brief overview of what these Scadutree Fragments do, they essentially make the DLC a little bit more manageable for you because this DLC is very difficult. It's also good to know that this only affects the DLC, so it's not going to change how easy the base game is, only how easy the actual DLC is. Now that you know what they actually do, let's get into the actual locations. Now I'll be going by sections of the actual DLC to try and go in order as much as possible, but of course it depends on how you progress through the DLC. The first place you're probably going to come across your first Scadutree Fragment is at this 3 paths cross site of grace. It would be very difficult to miss this one. Very close by, you're also going to come across the main gate cross site of grace and the main gate cross, which of course, as you're going to realize very quickly as you've gone through this DLC, every single one of the crosses is going to have one of these Scadutree fragments. And another cross that you're very quickly going to come across as you progress through the dungeon in front of the main gate cross site of grace is going to be Mikola's cross inside of this big legacy dungeon. This one will be slightly hidden behind some rubble, but as long as you experience and go around every single nook and cranny in this legacy dungeon, you'll find this cross very quickly. Another cross that you're going to quickly come across in the first area is the Pillar Path cross. It is just over the main bridge that you see when you first enter into this DLC and not too difficult to get to, especially when you look at the map. This is also where you interact with Theolia, who is also one of the main NPCs. And the final cross in this particular first area, as I've been calling it, is going to be at the Castle Ensis checkpoint side of grace. It's just going to be a Castle Ensis cross. It's very easy to come across, especially when you go up to this legacy dungeon. This is also, as you can see, a very obvious location as well. Moving on to areas that aren't crosses in the main first area, you want to make your way to the Church of Constellation, where you're going to see a giant statue of America with a purple item in front of it. This is actually going to give you 2 Scadutree fragments. You are going to come across a Black Knight, just prepare to fight him. Quickly moving north to the Scorched Ruins side of grace, you may have overlooked this tiny graveyard just to the east of the Scorched Ruins, where you're actually going to find a bunch of people hanging out in this graveyard and another particular NPC that's going to be having one of the glowing pots on its head. Anytime you see one of these guys with a glowing pot on his head, if he tries to run away, there is something valuable inside of that pot. In this situation, it's one of the Scadutree fragments. Another location where you'll very quickly come across this one, and I'll be surprised if you haven't gotten this already if you've gone through the DLC or just starting the DLC. As soon as you get to the castle front site of grace, you're going to very quickly come across a statue of America without a head on it. This statue, just like the Church of Constellation, has an item in front of it, and it's another shadow fragment. Another very easy one. And the final shadow fragment that you can find inside of this main first area is right near the Cliff Road terminus site of grace, which you can get to from the main gate site of grace, just following the coastline. You'll very quickly, as you progress through this particular part, you'll come across one of the guys that has a glowing pot in the graveyard along the coast. Simply defeat him and he will drop another Scadutree fragment. Just be prepared for all the other enemies in this area that are going to attack you at the same time. Moving on to the Plateau area, the very large Plateau area of this DLC, you'll very quickly come across the High Road cross site of grace and Needle Knight Letta. Of course, as I mentioned earlier in this video, every single cross location is going to have a shadow fragment, and this is no different. And just to the east of that previous cross, you'll very quickly come across the Morth Ruins and the Morth Ruins site of grace. It is also going to have a cross right next to it, which of course is going to have another one of the Scadutree fragments right next to it. You'll also come across Dryleaf Dane if you haven't killed him already. Another cross location is going to be very much to the east on a cliff side that you need to use a Spirit Spring to jump up to. It's going to be the Scadu View cross site of grace. And again, the Spirit Jump that's near this area is not difficult to activate. You just need to look a little bit. Now, jumping around the plateau a little bit, you're going to very quickly see the Shadowkeep in the back and this giant set of tents for a whole bunch of different warriors right in front of the Shadowkeep. As you're exploring this area up to the right as you're going through the main road, you will see another Headless America statue with a purple item on it. This is another fragment. Now, just to the west of that same exact camp, you'll very quickly come across the Church of the Crusade, which is very straightforward. Usually all the churches inside of the base game has something important in there as well, and this is no different because you're going to come across another giant statue of America, which will have another 2 Scadutree fragments at it. Now, looking at the Morth Ruins, if you go north just a little bit, you'll see this little lake, this little pond if you want to, that has a cave in the back. Now, as soon as you approach this area, you're very quickly going to see another statue in this location. As you're starting to see a trend, every single one of the statues of America that you've come across is beheaded, and at every single one, more often than not, you're going to find another Scadutree fragment. Moving back to the Morth Ruins, you can kind of see on the map a small camp for soldiers, and this is where you're going to find another one of those statues. Again, it's not that difficult to find this location, but if you haven't really explored explored it, it's very easy to overlook the other America statue that's sitting here with another fragment you can collect. This was one of my last ones because I simply overlooked this location. Now back at the Morth Ruins site of Grace once again, we're actually going to be sticking to the Morth Ruins kind of. You're going to want to make your way to where I placed the marker. I know it's a little difficult to get this exact location, so I'm going to ride the horse over so you can actually see. It's actually going to be one of the guys with the glowing pot on his head. Be careful, there is an enemy around here that will dumpster you if you're not careful. But the guy with the pot drops a fragment. I previously mentioned the Shadowkeep, and that's where we're going to be moving next, and of course the very first thing you interact with when you get into this area is going to be this golden hippo. Yes, if you defeat this golden hippo, you will also be getting some Scadutree fragments. Now since it's early on in the DLC, you probably aren't going to have a lot of Scadutree fragments, so this could be a little difficult, but when you do end up finally defeating him, you will get this aspect of the crucible called thorns and also 2 Scadutree fragments. What you'll also very quickly come to realize is that the Shadowkeep is absolutely massive, and there's a lot of hidden things inside this Shadowkeep, so getting some of these Scadutree fragments is difficult. One of the next places we're going to go is basically in the back section of the storehouse section of the Shadowkeep. Now there's a couple different ways to get the exact elevator that I'm showing you on screen right now, so if you don't go from the back section site of Grace, I totally understand, but what you mainly want to focus on is a statue of America that I'll be showing here in a second. Because once you get to the bottom of this elevator, you can very quickly run across to an open area where you're going to see a statue of America, a large one, that is going to be holding a purple item. You'll know you're in the right area if you have 2 Shadow Knights right next to this location, but take your time jumping onto the arm of this statue and then slowly make your way over to the hand where it's going to have this Scadutree fragment. Moving back to the storehouse, it's a very complicated area as you'll very quickly come across as soon as you get to this area, but there is going to be a point where you get to the 4th floor and there's going to be a cross that you can go and pick up a very easy Scadutree fragment. Now as you probably guessed, this is where Mesmer is also going to be as the main boss for the Shadowkeep, and right before you get to Mesmer, right as you're going up the stairs to his boss room, you'll come across a purple item that is going to be another free fragment. Now these next 2 fragments are not going to be very easy to get to because you have to really explore the Shadowkeep, and I'm not going to spoil that for you, but I will show you where you can look as soon as you get to these locations. From the Shadowkeep Black Gate site of Grace, you're going to come across a room to the right that looks like a prayer room with another Statue America. As you probably already guessed, this is a headless Statue America, but you are going to get another very easy Scadutree fragment. For this next set of fragments, you're going to have to fight a Remembrance boss. Once you defeat this Remembrance boss, you will get the Scadu site of Grace, and very quickly you're going to notice that there is a Scadutree chalice at the edge of the cliff. This section will be very hard to miss because the giant archway that's right in front of this chalice is very difficult to miss, and when you get to this chalice, you'll very quickly see that you can get 5 free Scadutree fragments, the highest amount that you'll get at one location. Moving to the west from the Shadowkeep, which you can only access these Rauh ancient ruins from the Shadowkeep, you're going to quickly come across a hippo in the area that I'm showing you right now inside of this body of water. All you have to do is defeat the hippo in this area and you will get another Scadutree fragment. As you progress through this labyrinth of a location, the Rauh ancient ruins, you will eventually come across the Rauh ancient ruins cross as well. You'll end up fighting someone right before this. It'll be very obvious because they're part of the Crucible. They'll have the Crucible armor. Once you defeat them, you will easily be able to get to this cross. And at the cross, a free fragment. This next Scadutree fragment you may come across earlier because you have to go through the labyrinth before you go to this cross location, but I'm going to show you from the cross location in case you did miss this guy, because he's one that has a glowing pot on his head, and there's actually 4 people inside of this labyrinth that have the glowing pot, but this is the only one in this area that drops a fragment. So backtracking your way back inside the ruins, you want to follow the pathing that I'm showing you past the initial jump down that at least I used to get down here, and there's going to be another one farther in the end of this bottom level of this labyrinth that you want to take up. Very quickly you'll come across a few guys huddled in a hallway with a guy on a pot on his head. This is the one you want to kill to get the fragment. Now the final fragment in the Rauh ancient ruins, you want to start at the Rauh ancient ruins west site of Grace, and you're going to very quickly see another section of this giant labyrinth area that you want to enter into, and up the very first pair of stairs you'll come into this giant open room, and at the end of this room you'll see this statue that has another fragment for you. I'm going to now quickly jump around the map going down to the Cerulean coast before I get to the end of the video with the very end location of this entire game. Once you make it to the Cerulean coast, you'll very quickly come across this site of Grace where there is another cross, so you can get another very easy, very free Scadutree fragment. Moving south into the fissure, what looks like you're just underneath the giant ocean because you are, you're going to come across the Fissure Cross site of Grace. You can only get to this location after you've visited the Shadowkeep and broken Miquella's Great Rune. Just keep that in mind. Getting to the fissure is as easy as it looks on this map. There's not a lot of enemies for you to go across. You just have to jump down into the fissure, and eventually as you progress through this area you will come across this cross where you're going to have another free Scadutree fragment at the base of it. Making our way back up to the mainland, you're going to eventually come across the Cerulean coast west site of Grace behind one of the giant coffins that's just littered across this area. From there you want to follow the path that I'm showing you, basically going inland land into a small crevasse that is just going to be covered with a bunch of different demi-humans and a couple small mini boss fights, I guess you could call them, but there's going to be a very particular small cave that's easily overlooked. You'll see this very first giant tombstone. From that giant tombstone, take your way to the left where you can see a bunch of angry worms that are popping out of the ground, and hug the cliffside on the right until you see this opening for this cave. You're going to see a purple item on a body, and that's going to be your other Scadutree Fragment. This next part of the Cerulean coast is basically the higher level of this area. You want to make your way to Charon's hidden Gravesite of Grace and over to the area that I'm showing with the marker of the sword, where you're going to come across another hippo that you get to fight. Just like all the other hippos in this game, you are going to get a Scadutree Fragment once you do defeat him. You can access Charon's hidden grave by going through the Jagged Peak section of this game, where you come across a lot of different dragons to give you an idea how to get there without spoiling it for you. Speaking of the Jagged Peaks, there is actually only one Scadutree Fragment in this entire area, which is a pretty large section of the DLC's map. What you want to do is start from the foot of the Jagged Peak side of Grace and follow the pathing that I'm showing you. You're very quickly going to be coming across a bunch of dragons that are fighting in this particular area on the screen right now. Now you can defeat them and help progress a quest line, or you can straight up ignore them and go into the little slice of the mountain, I guess you could say, where you're going to see a spirit spring that will take you up to the next level of the mountain, very quickly come across another spirit spring. Once you're at the top of this spirit spring, there's only one direction where there's another crevice that you can go through, and very quickly you're going to be attacked by a rolling boulder. There will be a path to the right that takes you around two other giant parts of the mountain that helps you ignore the boulders, but what we're trying to focus on here is that there's going to be a body with an item on it, and that's going to be your Scadutree Fragment. Now while we're on the subject of locations don't only have one Scadutree Fragment, you want to make your way down to the Templetown Ruins, which will take you a little bit of time as you progress through the game, but you will eventually come across this when you explore the whole game. There will be a small crack that allows you to get to the inside of these ruins, and on a scaffold you'll see a body with a purple item. Jump your way up here with Torrent, your horse, and you'll be able to get a very easy Scadutree Fragment. Now to get to this next location, you have to go through the Shadowkeep, the secret entrance where you find a coffin that drops you down to this lower area of the entire map. There are a lot of different videos to show you how to get down here, and I'm not trying to spoil that for you, but I will show you exactly where you can find the Scadutree Fragment, because it's very easily overlooked unless you're going from the pathing that I'm showing you from that particular side of Grace, the Recluses River downstream side of Grace. It's going to take a little bit of jumping downwards until you get right above the final waterfall in this area. It's a little tricky to get here, so try and follow the pathing as much as possible. Once you finally get to this long stretch of the river, after jumping down a couple cliffs, you'll very quickly come across some of the plants that will attack you with poison and from a distance, and eventually at the base of the largest waterfall, you'll see a coffin with the Scadutree Fragment in it. Now starting from the Recluses River downstream once again, you're going to actually see where my character is a little bit of ways to a different section of this river. From this river site of Grace, you will see some tombstones just below you when you look off the edge. Use these tombstones to get down to the next level of this river, and you'll very quickly come across a bunch of hippos that you need to destroy to get more fragments. Now I say hippos because there are going to be two different hippos with a bunch of different little items you can get around this area, but just keep in mind that there are going to be two of these guys, so be prepared for two of these heavier fights. Now as you progress down from that river, you're eventually going to come across the Abyssal section of the entire map, which is this very spooky area of the map. It's a very cool atmosphere in my opinion, but as you explore this deep dark area, you'll come across this church. This Abyssal church will have two Scadutree Fragments just waiting for you. Now there really is only one other Scadutree Fragment in this area, the Abyssal Woods, and I'm actually going to start showing you from the Abyssal Woods side of Grace, which kind of smacks you right smack dab in the middle of the Abyssal Woods, so it will be a little bit of exploration to actually get here. You'll be attacked by a lot of different rats and some very unique enemies that I will not be spoiling for you. From that side of Grace, you'll very quickly see a path that takes you right towards the cliffs that takes you deeper into the Abyssal Woods, where you'll come across a bunch of these corrupted priests, and at the end of this area you'll see a body with a purple item on it. This purple item is going to be your final Scadutree Fragment in the Abyssal Woods. Now after a lot of time in the game and a lot of deaths in Shadow of the Erdtree, you'll eventually come across the final area of the game, and as you progress this final area, you'll come across this spiral location where you're going to find another cross with a Scadutree Fragment. This spiral rise side of Grace is going to be the starting point for a couple different locations in this game, so for the next one we're going to start from that side of Grace like I just mentioned. I want you to follow the pathing upwards onto the main path that you have to go to actually progress this area. You know you're on the right path when a bunch of these gravestone birds start attacking you and shooting a brand new type of incantation at you, but keep going past them and upwards until you get to a particular location where you're going to see a more difficult enemy sitting on top of some of the roofs. This will let you know that you need to turn around and go into this particular room where you'll find another Scadutree Fragment just sitting there. This next Scadutree Fragment location is going to be a little difficult to get to, so what I'm going to let you do is follow the pathing as much as possible, and I'm going to stop talking so you can focus on it, because you can easily kill yourself if you do not follow this very closely. So now that you made that particular window jump and now you're back in the tower settlement, it's very straightforward. Go out the doorway and you're going to see another statue that's actually covered in a tarp that's going to have a purple item at the base of it. This is going to be your next Scadutree Fragment. And the very final Scadutree Fragment location in the game is in the Cleansing Chamber Ante-Room. This is the empty room that you're going to go into right before you start fighting Letta and all her friends. You'll see another altar that's going to have a purple item, and this is going to be your Scadutree Fragment. Now I know that's a lot of locations, that's a lot of stuff to cover, and I try to make my videos as short and sweet and to the point as possible. A little difficult for something that has this many locations and this many fights in such a large DLC, but I do hope this helps you guys complete getting every single one of the Scadutree Fragments. It definitely made my ending to the game a lot more fun to actually go through instead of getting absolutely swept by some of the bosses in this DLC. So if you did find this video helpful, make sure you let me know by hitting the like and subscribe buttons down below, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.